And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. This is my match reaction show, my five takeaways from Fulham's 3-2 loss to West Ham. The podcast version of this episode will be exclusively on the Cottage Talk Patreon page. I'm doing a one off here to go live on YouTube, X, and Facebook so you can actually watch this show. If you're interested, first of all, please do subscribe on our YouTube channel. I'm trying to get the numbers up on YouTube, so that would be a huge help. Right now, I think I have 728 subscribers. I really want to get this to over 1,000 would be phenomenal. So please do subscribe to the Cottage Talk YouTube channel. I would really appreciate that. That's number one. So want to mention that. But I also want to mention before I go any further on the show, I do want to mention the Cottage Talk Patreon page. For a limited time, I actually have a very special offer on this page. It's actually 70% off your first month, and it's for a limited time. So if you like what you are watching today and you want more content from Cottage Talk, please do consider becoming a paid member. Like I said, I have a special offer for the first month that's currently running for a short period of time. I would really appreciate that. If you want to become a paid member, that would be fantastic. Okay, enough of talking about subscribing and the Patreon page. I want to talk about what happened last night with my five takeaways. So let's start with my opening thoughts before I go through them. I'll be going for probably about 15 to 20 minutes. So I did a full-time show with Tony Gold, basically about 15, 20 minutes after the match ended. And Tony and I obviously were upset by what we watched. And I can say now it's been 12, 16 hours later. I'm still not happy with what I watched. It was terrible. It was a missed opportunity from Fulham Football Club. They should be beating a team like West Ham. I don't care about the new manager bounce, as I'll be going through my five takeaways. These were self-inflicted wounds, meaning that these mistakes were Fulham mistakes that led to 3 goals from West Ham. They deserve credit, and I'll be talking about that coming up next. I want to give them credit for even forcing a couple of these mistakes, but there's still mistakes that were preventable from Fulham Football Club. So that's what's upsetting. We all want Fulham to get into Europe. I know I desperately want them to get into Europe, and this was just basically an indication that they're just not there yet. They're not a team, the way that they are constituted, ready for this. Now, I hope by the end of the season that they get themselves in position and maybe they can sneak in. But these are the matches you have to be taking not just a draw from, but you need to be winning. And they did not do this. And there are several reasons why they were not able to do it. And I'll be going that into detail with my five takeaways. But I will also have a post-match show coming up soon. Again, a lot of content on Cottage Talk on this match, and of course the upcoming Leicester City match. But my opening take here is that just a terrible missed opportunity from Fulham Football Club, and something that I think we might be looking back at the end of the season saying this is why they did not get into Europe. It was the West Ham match. It was both West Ham matches. It was the draws. But this one hurt against a team they should be beating. I don't care that they're on the road. They should be beating this team. They beat this team on the road last season. Same players and a weakened side with all their injuries, and Fulham could not beat them. That's not good. But again, for me, it has more to do with Fulham than it does with West Ham, but I will give them credit, and that's going to start my five takeaways from this match. Number 5 is West Ham deserved credit for taking advantage of Fulham mistakes. All 3 goals involved errors by Fulham. The first one, Andreas Pereira, we could talk about that at Bernd Leno. The second one, same thing. That was a bunch of Fulham mistakes within the 2 goals, but there was one in the second goal as well. In the third goal, Bernd Leno, what are you doing there? But there are reasons for why I think these mistakes happen, and that I will be coming into later in my takeaways. Just keep that in mind. But the other team has to take advantage of them, and they took their goals well. So regardless of how I feel about West Ham, I have to give them credit because they could have missed those opportunities, but they took advantage of all three. So on the face of it, like I said, they deserve the victory because they took advantage of these opportunities that were given to them by Fulham. Like I said, maybe they caused some of these too, but I look at this as more of a Fulham issue than a West Ham situation where they were the better team. I don't feel that they played great, but they took advantage of the situations that were handed to them, and they got all 3 points. So they deserve credit for that. That's my number 5. Number 4, the fact that Andreas Pereira took personal responsibility for his actions in this match is a positive. I've been very critical of Pereira, and I can still be critical of his play. I will be on the post-match show. I was on the full-time show, but I'm just talking about one of the things that he did here, which I think is important. There are quotes out there of what Pereira said. He took responsibility for his mistake there, and I think that's important. I think you need players to be stepping up and say, it's on me. I like it when a player does it. I love it when a manager does that because you're all in it together. You're saying, I made a mistake here. I'm responsible. So that actually, even though I've been critical of his character, talking about Pereira, I think this is a good thing and a good character situation for Andreas Pereira. Admitting a mistake. That's a big thing in my book. So I want to give him credit for that. That's why that's number 4. And I hope other players, when they make mistakes, do the same thing because you realize that you're all in it together. You are a team, but you're within this team structure. You are taking responsibility for an issue that you had. So I want to give Pereira credit for that. Number 3, Marco Silva has a difficult decision to make when it comes to how much he's going to play Josh King moving forward. So Josh King, in these cameos, especially last night, shows you the talent that he has. This is a player that I truly believe could be a difference maker for years to come for Fulham Football Club. We could talk about a new contract for him. Obviously, that would be important. But we're talking about this season and a young player like this who keeps impressing. And then on the flip side, you have a player that you paid a lot of money for who's not getting the job done right now, who's a passenger. That is Smith Rowe. So it's a difficult time for Marco Silva because this kid is making all of the right moves right now. And in some minds, some people want him to start, and I can understand that. But I think you have to be careful with a player like this in his development. Do you throw him too much into the fire? So I think there's a balancing act going on here because part of the problem is you have another player who's not performing. You just don't. Who, like I said, has just not been the player that you bought this summer. I still think that there's a great player there with Smith Rowe, but for whatever reason, he's just not getting the job done. I think he's playing afraid. I think he's afraid of making a mistake. I think he's doing some of the other work that Marco wants him to do defensively. You can see him do the pressing that Pereira would do. I like the fact that he's doing that, but I think he's got it in his head right now. This is just my opinion, that he has to play mistake-free. I think he has to play with freedom. You're seeing that with Josh King, and I think that is a huge asset right now for King. And he might have set up the goal. Again, it was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, Adama Traore misses the opportunity, but he set up that opportunity. It should have been a goal. And that, again, just shows the ability that this young kid has. But I think you got to be careful. Marco really has a difficult decision when it comes to how much do I play Josh King, because you have to think of not just right now, but you also have to think about his future development. So it's difficult because he's going to make mistakes. So if you allow him to make mistakes and you can live with that, I'm okay with that. but you also have to think, how is he going to react to making a mistake? How would he react to a mistake that Andres Pereira made? Just think about that. So I don't think this is an easy decision Marco has on his plate. That's why I wanted to bring that up. That's something I took out of this match because I know a lot of supporters are going to be saying, you have to start Josh King. And my initial reaction, even last night, was yes. But I've taken a little pause on that after talking to a couple of supporters, thinking, well, maybe we have to be a little bit careful with him because of his development for years to come. I think it's a valid argument, and it's a valid issue that I think Marco has when it comes to Josh King, but he's one for the future. Maybe he is one for right now as well. Okay, so let's go on to number 2, and I think this one is becoming too obvious, and I was hoping maybe he would be on the bench for this match, but Fulham continue to miss Sander Berge. And I think it really showed itself in this match because I think the combination of Lukic and Berge could really do a number in that central midfield area and then allow your number 10 to have freedom. Andres Pereira simply is just not built to play this role. He isn't. And I think moving forward, I really want to see Berge and Lukic play together and make a decision on the number 10 and then live with that. Because playing Smith Rowe and Pereira together, just not working. It absolutely is not working unless you're going to change the formation a little bit. But if you have one as your 8 and one as your 10, it just is not working. I think you need someone that can do the defensive duties as your number 8, but also move the ball forward, and that's Sander Berge. And I think big time Fulham missed him last night. That's why. That's my number 2 takeaway. All right, let's go to my number 1 takeaway, and it's this. There are few reasons why the mistakes Fulham made last night happened. There are. So let's talk about number 1. This, to me, is the first reason. And that has to involve, believe it or not, talent. So I actually saw Scott Tanfield from Friends of Fulham put this out there talking about the talent that Fulham have. And, it's an interesting thought. And maybe, just maybe, the players that Fulham have, even defensively, they're not at the level that we need them to be. You paid all this money for Anderson. Maybe he was not the right player to bring in as your center back. You got Diop sitting, and I honestly would make a change there. Bernd Leno is a fantastic goalkeeper for Fulham. Fantastic, and I would not change him, and I want him there for years to come. But I think we might have to live with the fact that he might make this error or errors in games. It's just part of being a goalkeeper, but I think he is basically maybe a notch below some of the best goalkeepers in the world. That's not to say that he's not one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League, but I think he's maybe just a notch below. He has this mistake in him. Bassey has this mistake in him. We know that Jedi is more of an offensive back than a defensive back. I think Castagna is very good. Maybe we miss Kenny Tete a little bit. It's just an interesting thing, but I think it's something to look at when you look at the mistakes that are happening. Maybe the upgrade at center back that they brought in wasn't good enough. Maybe he wasn't that great, and maybe this is the reason why. I don't know, but I think it's a valid argument that Fulham need more talent. I think that they need more talent in midfield wingers and up front, but maybe there's also an argument in defense as well. That's my number 1 point of why we see mistakes. The other is the style of play. So this comes down to something that Tony Gold said last night, talking about this obsession to want to play like Pep Guardiola. And I agree with that. And I think Marco falls into this trap. They all want to play the ball out from the back. I get that. I totally understand that. But I think there are certain situations where maybe you might consider not doing that. Maybe this was a match that you shouldn't have done that. Now you're going to say, why? West Ham are struggling. But West Ham's players want to impress Potter. And Potter came out pressing Fulham, and they could not handle it. And listen, Fulham have shown an issue when teams press them, and it caused the mistakes. So I think a factor in the reason why we saw these mistakes is this feeling that we have to play the ball out from the back. And sometimes it can be very beneficial, but it is risk reward. And sometimes the risk is not worth the reward. And maybe this is one of those matches. But the style of play, the way that Fulham play, was definitely a factor in these mistakes. But also it comes down to the players. That's the final. They have to be careful with their decision making. And their decision making in this match was horrific defensively, horrific. And so that's why I'm saying we have a few reasons why we saw the mistakes. But if Fulham want to be in Europe, they have to cut down these mistakes. And I had in my 3 keys to victory that one of them was they have to play mistake-free defensively. And they failed. And they lost the match. Now, I'm no genius, but I do know a little bit about Fulham Football Club. And I know when they can play mistake-free defensively, they give themselves a chance to win. And they gave themselves a hill to climb up with these mistakes. So for me, that's why I wanted to focus so much as my number one takeaway on the mistakes. And like I said, there are a few reasons. Maybe I can think of, say, 3 reasons. Okay. So I just want to share a couple comments. This is from Gary Cooper. He says, King deserves to start at Leicester. Follows that up with valid. But other people at this age are thrown in and flourish. Can only be good for him. King deserves to start. He brings a much-needed energy. Gary, I agree with the much-needed energy part. I'm just bringing up the situation that Marco has. I'm not saying that you're not right. I'm just saying that I don't think it's just an easy decision for him to make. I think he has to be careful with the kid. That's all I'm saying. I see what you're saying. Other managers have done that. But I think that there's more to that decision than he looks good out there. I think you have to factor in other things. So good point, though. This is from Diego. If Sanderberg is injured, Harrison Reed shall play. Now, that's an interesting one. I thought about that too, Diego. Maybe he should play. Why wasn't he involved? Because I think they were missing Harrison Reed for a while too. They need basically a second defensive midfielder. And I think, and especially in a match like that, I think that's what they needed. I'm glad that you brought it up. And he also follows this up, and Diego says, Diop and Bassi do better partnership. Yep. You could be onto something because right now Anderson is just not at it. And finally, my friend Gary Cooper says, Anderson looked awful at the moment, or looks awful. And I would agree with you, Gary. Very good stuff. All right. Thank you, everyone who's watching live. Like I said, I wanted to introduce this show. If you're not familiar with it, it is my 5 takeaways. It is exclusive on the Cottage Talk Patreon page. And this podcast version will be exclusive. But if you're interested, please do check out the Cottage Talk Patreon page because I am putting up a lot of content on there. And I am offering very special offer of 70% off your first month. So please do check that out. It's for a limited time. Okay. Well, listen, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. My name is Russ Coleman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk.